the question I presented through the guided visualization is, what can I do to connect better with you? What practices should I start practicing? Now, she doesn't speak when she's in the inner journey. I just ask the questions. And then she opens her eyes and there are tears in her eyes. She's very emotional. And here is what she said. I came up with all those ideas for my soul. Let's dance, let's move, let's do some free spirited things. And my soul was just like, stop talking, stop talking. What did you say? Stop talking, quiet, just sit with me, just be with me. And she said, as I guided her, her all intention shifted. That's the guidance she received from her soul. She said to just be, to just sit with, to stop talking, to just expand, to feel the light. Those were her words. And I said, explain the emotions to me. Why are you so emotional right now? And she said, oh, it's so messed up. If you ask me what practices I should do, I would come up with a long list of practices that I should have done and I didn't. And it was so tender, she said. It was so soft. My soul simply wanted me to be with her.
Welcome to the Shift Your Vibe to Thrive podcast. My name is Emily Evans Russell, and I'm a single mom, multiple six-figure business owner, and master mindset and energy coach. I created this podcast with two main targets. One, to give you practical tools so that no matter where you are in your life right now, you not only know that things can shift, but you know how to make them greater. And two, to change your frequency so that you become an energetic match for everything you desire. I'm talking your relationships, your finances, your success, all of it. Think of this podcast as your weekly energetic upgrade with a mix of subconscious mind hacks, ways to quantum leap, and consciousness shifts. A place where you learn to sculpt your reality and actually finally truly have the magical life you deserve and one that works for uniquely you. Are you ready to uplevel your reality? I think I hear yes, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for being here. And now let's go to the show. Michal, it's so wonderful to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's so great to be here. I'm already excited.
I know we had a mutual friend of ours connect us. And I went to your website and I was looking at all the things you do. You just had a book release this summer and you have all these topics. And the one that you speak about so beautifully, and the one that really connected with me, and I thought like my listeners would be so interested in, is this question of why aren't so many of us happy when we have a lot, or what, like we might have a beautiful partner or husband, kids, a job we love, and yet there's still this craving for more, this dissatisfaction. What is that all about?
Right. It's such a big question. And I can humbly say that I am not going to say here, I have the answer and I know why you're not happy. I think that it's one of those questions that it's like a life journey for each one of us to find their answer. But I think that's really the core of all my work and my book, Becoming Soulful, that if we turn into our soul and if we reconnect with our soul, because many of us are lacking a connection with our soul, then we find the key to our happiness within. So you can address this question of why aren't we happy in so many different ways. My perspective that I would like to share, and it's really like shining a light on maybe one perspective of the answer to the question, is that disconnecting from the soul is at the core of many conditions, physical and emotional, and it's also at the core of being unhappy. Most people are not aware how critical is the connection with the soul, and most people are not also aware that many times in life when we face a crisis and we take some action, to deal with the crisis, whatever it is. And I'm sure that, you had your moments, I had my moments. and we still feel empty inside, even though we're getting the help, or we're making the change. Or let's say, I'm thinking about my clients, a woman that got a divorce, or a woman that, changed her job or changed her career. And then after the change, there's still this feeling of emptiness inside, like really going through the motions without feeling a sense of purpose and joy. And then they'll ask, but I made a change. Why? What is this feeling inside? And that's the disconnection from the soul.
Wow. Can you talk to us more about what is the soul? Because I really like the analogy. I think so many of us, like in the situations you described, where we'll have some crisis, some big thing occur. And we're often looking, like if you think of a house, like a beautiful house, but inside it got all messy and there's banana peels and dirt everywhere. And we wouldn't try to clean up the inside by going out. But yet it seems like so many of us people here are looking outside at everything to try to fix a fundamental like unhappiness or unsatisfaction. So when you talk about the soul, I understand you as talking about inside, but can you elaborate on that for people? Because so
Yes.
people use different words, and what is that? And how do I connect with it?
Yeah, of course. Yes. I'll elaborate on that for a minute. But when you said, like, imagine a house and it's like chaotic inside, I want to just share a story. It's not my story. It's a well-known folk story, but I want to share a story for a minute. Okay.
Yes.
So an owner had a dog, and the dog was very restless and irritated, and just like walking from side to side. You have a dog, so you know how it is. Like when your dog is like restless and irritated, and something is going on, and you're not sure what. But this was like a big time, irritated, restless. Like you could see that the dog is not happy, and the owner, who really loved the dog, wanted to do whatever they can to fix that problem for the dog. So first they got a new crate. It didn't help. Then they thought, okay, maybe the dog wanted to move to another room in the house. So they moved the dog to another room, got a new doggy bag. Then the next step, when the dog is still so irritated and restless, was maybe the dog wants to be outside a little bit. Let's build him something in the yard. And then the dog is there still. And the owner was really dog lover. So they decided to move to another house. I mean, something in this house. So they moved to another house, and the story goes on and on and on. They moved to another country. You know what was the dog's problem?
What?
It had fleas.
Yep.
So, and that's really the unhappiness from inside, that we can change our job or change our partner or make changes. And I'm not saying that it's not meaningful to make changes. I know it takes courage and it's part of our path, but the soul, really, if we are happy on a soul level, it's this happiness from within that is not dependent upon our external circumstances. And going back to your question about like what is the soul, so my perspective on that is that the soul arrives in this physical body at this time, despite all the challenges, the obstacles, the disasters, the world disaster, global crisis, and personal crisis that we go through. And the soul's choice is really to experience life through us. And the purpose of the soul is to learn, grow, and expand. So on a soulful level, we are meant to learn and grow and expand our life, to go through life, living life to the fullest, feeling all range of emotions. And then we make the choices, right? And we can either learn the lessons that we are meant to learn, or we don't learn the lesson, and then a lesson will continue to come back to us again and again and again. So see the soul, imagine the soul as a spark. It's the pure essence of who we are, a spark within us. It doesn't have a physical shape. It's not an entity. It doesn't have a physical form. It's a quality or a different dimension. And this spark carries both your human and divine essence. And I want to read for a minute the definition, the soul definition for my book. So here is what I wrote. The soul is where our true self lives, pulsing with the energy of life. It's the living core of our being, filled with our feelings, experiences, life stories, and treasured memories, all of which chart the course of our evolution and the essence of our being. Our soul maps out where we've been and where we're headed, shaping who we are.
That's beautiful.
And I think it's important to understand that when the soul is craving more, when the soul is hungry for more, especially during those times when we face a personal crisis, then the craving is not always something that we can understand it in our intellect, right? With our mind. There is a need to really connect deeply with our soul and receive the messages from within. So if I go back to your question about why aren't we happy, and I say each one of us can find their own answers within themselves, then one of the core critical pieces of my message is that if we rely less on our intellect and more on our internal guidance system, that's what I like to call it, the wisdom of our soul, then we receive guidance that is more holistic than just thinking or relying on our intellect, which is what we are trained really to do.
Yep. And I get from the intellect, how do you tell the difference between what your mind and your intellect, or maybe the ego, is desiring versus the soul's hunger or craving for something? Because I love the way you said this, it's this light of you, it's where you're connected to the divine, where your body here or might be like, well, I want the house, I like the relationship, and getting some fulfillment from that, but that's a very different desire than when you're speaking
right.
of, yeah. And
right.
How does someone that's new to it start to differentiate or notice, like, when is it coming from my internal wisdom and when am I getting confused by all this other stuff?
Right. It's a really good question. Actually, let's divide it into two questions. So one part of the question is, how do we even begin to communicate with our soul? And then how do we know if the answers that we get it from our soul, or it's still like from our mind or intellect? So for the first question, how do we start connecting with our soul? I'll give you an example, okay? Actually, something that happened yesterday. I was in a session with a client. She's actually a therapist, and she's doing sessions with me, coaching and mentoring with me. And she read a chapter in my book. She read the chapter about soulfulness because there are some women that they're doing coaching and mentoring with me, and I take them through the process that I present in the book. She read a chapter about soulfulness. She came back to the session and she said, that was so meaningful that I read your chapter. I realized that I am not doing all the practices that I could do to live authentically, because the title of the chapter about soulfulness is authenticity, how to connect with your soul and be authentic. And she was like, it made so clear that I need to be more consistent with our practices. I have to differentiate like what practices I can do to really connect with my soul. And I could really sense the self-judgment and the self-blame of like, I'm not doing enough. So I had, during my sessions, I am also really connected to my soul and to my internal guidance system. So I had a decision point that I trusted my intuition, and very quickly I said to her, I want to stop you for a minute. Is it okay if instead of having a conversation about this awareness that you had, I will ask you to close your eyes and I will take you on a journey inside? She said, sure. So I did that, and I often do that, and I talk about it in my book when I make up guided visualizations on the spot that I tailor them to the person's needs. So I take her through a guided visualization, and which is one of the basic ways to connect to the soul. First of all, to help her shift her awareness from what's happening around her to inside, and then inviting her to imagine the spark inside and to see the light and connect with the soul. and to start dialoguing with the soul. And the question I presented through the guided visualization is, what can I do to connect better with you? What practices should I start practicing? Now, she doesn't speak when she's in the inner journey. I just ask the questions. And then she opens her eyes and there are tears in her eyes. She's very emotional. And here is what she said. I came up with all those ideas for my soul. Let's dance, let's move, let's do some free spirited things. And my soul was just like, stop talking, stop talking. What did you say? Stop talking, quiet, just sit with me, just be with me. And she said, as I guided her, her all intention shifted. That's the guidance she received from her soul. She said to just be, to just sit with, to stop talking, to just expand, to feel the light. Those were her words. And I said, explain the emotions to me. Why are you so emotional right now? And she said, oh, it's so messed up. If you ask me what practices I should do, I would come up with a long list of practices that I should have done and I didn't. And it was so tender, she said. It was so soft. My soul simply wanted me to be with her. And then, we had a whole conversation about what does it mean and everything. But at the end of the session, she said to me, I'm a therapist and I'm taking other people through similar processes, but I now realize how limited it is when we rely on our intellect and we just ask questions. I mean, your way of taking me in and connecting with the soul, it was just such a profound experience. So I wanted to share that, first of all, because it just happened yesterday, so it's still fresh in my head, but maybe it demonstrates the difference between receiving information from your internal guidance system or receiving information from your intellect. Does it make sense?
I think it's a brilliant example. I'm very much like your client, a woman, where I can come up with all of these things in my mind. And recently I was actually just meditating in silence and I got a similar message of just sit down. You're so busy taking actions, which are required, but right now, just sit down. It's okay to let more things just come and not have to be working so hard. And I think that's a great example of when it's internal. It's almost, I used to be very envious of people who could hear actual voices, or, we all get that wisdom in different ways. And I realized there's such a unique spectrum of how we hear that message, but it's a very different energy. And that story so exemplifies that, when it's just there in you versus you're trying to think of things to move outwards to find something.
Right. And I wonder, I know for you, it might be a new language and for maybe many of the listeners, but I wonder, when you look back at some decisions that you made, throughout your life, if you can remember a decision that was maybe unexpected or new or radical, or that now you look back and you say, that was not my intellect. That was really a message that I got from within. Can you recall something like that?
Oh, I can recall a lot, but most recently, I left a job of 10 years and it had been very fulfilling, and my mind had a lot of reasons why I should stay. And there were a lot of wonderful things about it, but there was this inside voice that I tried to shove down and go, no, this can still work. And eventually I just couldn't not listen to that. And then upon choosing it, even though it was difficult, afterwards, it's only been several months, but there's been such a sense of peace and more clarity, with more of that internal compass really showing me. Since I moved in that direction, it opened up this whole new path of that.
Right. So if, let's say, if we had this conversation when you were about to make the decision, and if I ask you to close your eyes, and I gave you two options. One option was, imagine your life with your eyes closed. Imagine your life when you continue with your current job, and just imagine it and really feel it in your body. What do you think what words would you bring up to describe how it felt in your body?
Tight, stressed out, burned out, tired. Yeah.
And if I ask you then to imagine yourself doing something else, not this current job, and I ask you again to close your eyes, and I would ask you how did it feel in your body, what would you say?
There's a smile comes across my face and kind of like a bubble. It's like a lightness. Yeah.
Right.
So
Exactly. So going back to your question, how do we know if an answer that we get is from our intellect or really from the depth of our soul? So we already covered a few. First of all, it's fresh and many times it's unexpected. Sometimes it catches you by surprise. It's not what you thought. It also invokes a sense of expansion, a freeing sensation, rather than a sense of constriction in the body. And it's really important to really notice how it feels in the body. Many times, initially, it feels odd, and you're not sure if it really, really makes sense. And I'll say something else, really based on like my experience, even with myself recently, with an answer to a question I received from my soul that was completely the opposite of what I thought. And as I was starting to take the direction that my soul guided me, then I realized there was another reason why I needed to do that, not what I even thought. So it's like the soul, because the soul is connected not only to our human self, but also to our divine self, to spirituality, to something bigger, then there is some wisdom and there is some knowledge that is bigger than us. I can give an example. Just before the pandemic started, we lived in New York back then, and then I traveled to Atlanta all the time to teach. And this was my last class teaching in Atlanta. Pandemic was not really like on yet. I was teaching a class. It was a Sunday. I had this message coming up from within, like, take your phone out, ask somebody to record this demonstration. I didn't have any reason to do that. I listened to the guidance, gave my phone to a student, said, can you please record this whole demonstration? The next day we fly back to New York, and the day after, New York is in lockdown. And then 3 years, all my classes were only virtual, and I used this, this recording that it just came from within. It's like, and I remember my intellect is like, why do you need that? Like, you don't need that, you're here. I was like, just do it, that's an example. It's as if like my soul knew on a bigger level that just do it, and I listened. We don't always listen. But does that answer your question about how do we know?
It's beautiful. And I love that explanation, because there's this, the soul goes beyond this small timeline that we're just seeing things right here. And that wisdom, like you said, comes from this very different expanded place where all of the pieces of the tapestry and come together that we can't see all the time when we're here looking out through eyes and our intellect through our body. It's like we miss a lot of that when we're not listening.
Exactly. And that's why this connection is important. And I think, I mentioned a few times connecting to our internal guidance system. So when you start communicating with your soul, and when you start maybe integrating some practices with your life that can be very simple, like we said before, like, sit quietly with me, like put your hands on your heart and just feel for a few minutes. It can also be other practices like walk in nature, but it doesn't have to be those things. Whatever fills up your soul, things that fills up your soul, that's when you receive the guidance from within. And I think one of the missions behind my book and my method, the Soulful Healer method, is really to empower people to connect to their soul, and to connect to their soul, and then to unlock the best version of themselves so they can live truly aligned with who they are. And to be authentic, we all use the word authentic. What does it really mean to be authentic? What does it really mean to live an authentic life? For me, it's really connecting to this pure essence of who we are, the spark that is within ourselves, and then receive the guidance from within. So that's how we live truly aligned with who we are.
And so I want to ask you about that, because as we receive that guidance and we start to follow that, what happens when it seems to change? So when yes, I'm lit up by this, and this is my passion, and you feel like you're doing your purpose. I mean, my job was a great example of that. For many years, it was very fulfilling. And had you asked me that question, I would have said, oh, my body feels good. And then it shifted. So how do we start discovering, maybe when it feels like it's time to change course? How do we follow that? Or what happens? What happens?
Right. It's a really good question. You know why? Because it doesn't always make sense.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't always make sense. And yet, if we trust the guidance that we receive from within, then it's really part of our journey. A recent conversation with a woman that I mentored and coached years ago, it's a little controversy, but she had an affair. And while many times with my clients, like their partner had an affair, she had an affair. She was very unhappy in her marriage, and she reached out to me when she had an affair. It was many, many years ago. Fast forward, and I know it's like it's more in the movies, it doesn't happen a lot in real life, but fast forward, she got a divorce and she married the man that she had the affair with, which definitely was her soulmate. Now, when she had the affair, it's like all the guilt feelings and all the judgment and everybody when they found out, and it was a disaster. It was a disaster. And I remember in our conversations that while her intellect told her, are you out of your mind? Are you going to lose your marriage and your kids and their teenagers and all that? And just, stop the affair. There was a voice inside her that said, no, you're meant to do that. And you know what? Maybe even, let's just say, and I can think about other cases when the affair didn't hold, and then it was nothing, like, but the woman got a divorce. Maybe the only way she could really have the courage to get out of an unhealthy marriage was to have this affair. And I'm not saying go have an affair, but I know cases that's on it was part of her journey, and she had to learn how to deal with the consequences. But did she know, and I'm talking now about a few different women, but did she know when she had the affair that it will lead her to whatever it led her? No. But it was still the guidance she received from within.
I have tingles all over my body with those stories, because it's so real that a lot of us can relate to that. And in that moment, when it is all the stuff is coming up, it's so hard. How in that moment, because in hindsight with these women, they could see, well, wow, that helped me get out of this marriage. Or now I found my person to be with for the rest of my life. And it's so easy to see it in hindsight. And then when it's going on in that moment, are there some practices? I mean, you mentioned all these different things, but when that comes up and we hear the voice and we're trusting it and we say, I know this doesn't make sense. How do we make dealing with all that very real stuff in the moment easier?
Immediately when you asked the question, what came up was, and honestly, there are so many different ways of practices that can help. But for me personally, what really helped me in times where I had to make a courageous decision was my spiritual practice, my spiritual connection. I think that maintaining a spiritual connection, and my perspective on spiritual connection is a non-religion spiritual connection. It can strengthen the religion, but it doesn't have to be. I have a big community of like more than 3,000 people actually that studied Reiki with me throughout the years, and the Reiki became their spiritual practice. It's not a religion, but there's something about, and it doesn't have to be Reiki, it's something about maintaining a practice of spirituality that allows you to rely not only on your power, but something bigger than you, that allows you also to live in partnership with something that is bigger. And doesn't matter how you call it, if you call it existence or universe or universal energy or God or Jesus, or it doesn't matter how you call it, something bigger than us. That's what really helps us to trust and to know that we are okay, or that we are going to be okay. And I grew up in a house that didn't encourage religious practices or spirituality in any way. It's something that I found through actually trauma when I was searching for answers. But spirituality is one thing that comes to mind. And then another thing is support, to not do it alone. And we're talking about women and, you know, and motherhood and marriage and all the different roles. I think that there's something about the sisterhood of women, like to have your sisterhood, you have to have your tribe, to have your girlfriends that are helping you, as well as professionals, to not do it alone.
I think both of those are so key. And I know in the times in my life personally, when I've gone through a divorce, change of job, breakup, my oldest daughter got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It's been several years now, but all of those were such big changes. And those are exactly the things I went to, the people in my life, and really using that support and expanding that circle if required. And then I really enjoy how you talk about spirituality, because I've explored different modalities. I was raised in one religion, not very religious, our family, but we'd go to church on Christmas.
Uh-huh.
But like you said, it doesn't matter the name or the practice or the modality. It's just a connection where, rather than seeing things from this very small place, you're being taken care of and that there's something bigger going on. And just that change of perspective is so healing. Just that alone, however you get that, it amazes me, that simplicity of when I used to teach biology and science. So I love learning about the universe and its vastness and how stars are formed. And when you remember that, it's so hard to get very bogged down in even something that is very intense in the moment. When you sort of zoom out to that perspective of something bigger, it's so healing.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting when you're talking about the star and the cosmos. It reminds me, when I was writing the chapter about spirituality in my book, I really wanted to come up with an illustration that reflects my vision for spirituality. So I did come up with an illustration that is included in my book. And in the illustration, you have, in the upper part of the illustration, you have like a circle, and it's the divine self. And then in the bottom part, you have the human self. And in between those two, there's some spiral lines going up and down. And in the middle of those lines is the soul. And I call it the map of spirituality, because I think it's when we work in harmony, both with our divine self and with our human self, guided by our soul that carries this spark. That's why the soul is like in the middle of the illustration, even though the soul is everywhere. Then this spiritual connection really helps us, supports us in living life to the fullest. And when I look back at my life of like 30 years of living a spiritual life, I think that the biggest gift is that with each crisis or just life challenges, when you look for the lesson, when you ask yourself, what is this pain here to teach me? What is this heartbreak here to teach me? What's the lesson here? Then it really helps you grow. And by the way, I don't believe that stuff happens to us because we are tested and we are meant to go through suffering. No. But when we do, when something happens, when we suffer, it's the choice that we make, if to make it into an opportunity and learn the lesson, or to stay in suffering. So that's why I think spirituality for me is really important.
It's beautiful. And when you talk about your drawing, I think that's such a good example of going beyond this duality of, I'm either just in a body and having a human experience, or I need to be totally enlightened and here.
Exactly.
And it's like, no, it's actually so this beautiful connection of all of that. And it's not just one or the other. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. And I'll say one thing about it. Recently, somebody asked me, my book is Becoming Soulful, 6 Keys for Profound Transformation. But on the book cover, I say it's for in your therapy, coaching, your healing art professional. And even though the book is not only for professionals, it's really for any woman who would like to go through a personal transformation. Somebody recently asked me, why did you decide to write a book or mention professionals like therapists and coaches? And I said, I truly, truly believe that with all the like anxiety and depression and all the mental health issues that there are outside in the world, there's so many professionals who are dedicated to the work and they're helping other people. And I imagine a world where each professional, not only each person and each woman and each human being, but each professional, when they support other people, when they empower, when they help other people, they are in touch with their own soul, with spirituality. So they're not afraid to integrate a non-religious spirituality with the practice and soul work and body work, because so many professionals don't understand that talk therapy by itself is not enough. And I think because my vision is so big and I really want to see a world of soulful healers, then I decided to approach both the women and the professionals. But my hope is that each one of us, women, human beings, and also professionals, will really learn how to turn into our internal guidance system and live aligned with who we are. And I see it all the time from the professionals who are trained by me and they take this work to the world, how it has a ripple effect. And this soul connection and spiritual connection really translate into sustainable impact and transformation.
And that ripple effect, at least for me, and I know in a lot of the people I work with too, that's one of my soul cravings, and to have that effect. And that looks different for different people, but I think where a lot of us come here with desiring more, and part of that ripple effect is what's so beautiful to see. If I can work with this person, it affects everyone they're interacting with, their family members, their friends. All of that is so beautiful. So it really sounds like this book, I mean, this conversation has been so beautiful. This book is really a part of your soul on paper.
Oh, yes, exactly. It's my soul on paper.
I love that. So how can people find your book? It was just released, and just learn more about you.
Yeah, so the book is on Amazon and it goes Becoming Soulful. So Becoming Soulful, 6 Keys for Profound Transformation. And on the website, my website is beaconsofchange.com. And if you go to my website, beaconsofchange.com, you can find all about me and about my book.
Thank you so much, Michal. This was really beautiful. And you're so eloquent in the way that you talk about all this, and also practical of how we can start really enjoying this gift we have of being here with our bodies and this connection to something bigger all at the same time.
Thank you, Emily. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I love how it was so flowing and casual and no preparations, and just like, I think we connected very well. Thank you so much. This was a soulful connection.
Yeah, for me too. Thank you. I hope you got something out of that episode. If you like this podcast, please share it with someone you know who'd find it useful or interesting, and subscribe so that you can listen to past and upcoming shows.